In a surprise move, President Trump now says that Washington will be sending more weapons to Ukraine. Just days ago, the U.S. had said that it would temporarily stop some arms from going to the country.
We're going to send some more weapons. We have to. They have to be able to defend themselves. They're getting hit very hard now. They're getting hit very hard. We're going to have to send more weapons. Your defensive weapons, primarily.
But in Ukraine, this news is being met with a high degree of skepticism. Trump has made a string of U-turns regarding his support for Ukraine and has repeatedly praised Russia's president.
In principle, we shouldn't rely so much on the U.S. Weapons are weapons, but much of the territory was liberated by small groups. It's just good planning and a lot of hard work.
I'll tell you one thing. I don't trust him. I didn't trust him during his first term, and now even less so. Because nothing he says matches his actions. He cooperates with Putin, and that's the truth, unfortunately.
So you're skeptical?
Yes, I don't trust him at all. I consider the U.S. to be an unreliable ally for Ukraine, completely unreliable. It has already become a meme on all social networks that we can't count on them. And Trump says one thing today and another tomorrow.
All right, I want to go now to Marina Miron. She's a military analyst in the Defense Studies Department at King's College, London. Marina, it's good to see you again. Any military general would tell you that planability is important to waging war and winning war. How difficult are these U-turns from President Trump making it for Ukrainian generals to plan anything?
Good evening, Brent. Well, you're actually making a very good point, but as Moltke's elder said, even the best plan doesn't survive the first contact with the enemy. So essentially, the problem here is not just operational planning, but also strategic planning. And you have to make a lot of plans and a lot of contingency plans. And for the Ukrainians, and they have made this experience before, and not just with the United States, also with the Europeans promising 1 million 155 millimeter artillery shells, you have to know how to allocate your resources. And therefore, you're already planning for the incoming deliveries from the West. Mm-hmm. And in this scenario, I think that Ukraine had to learn the hard way and not count on Western deliveries or not count as much and do a lot of contingency planning in terms of what to do if they don't get air defense interceptors or artillery shells. So it's very, very difficult for Ukraine, but I think probably the safest way for the Ukrainian general staff is not to count on it. If it comes, great. If it doesn't come, they still have a few plans that they can execute.
And it looks like now that these weapons will be coming. I'm wondering, why do you think we're seeing this change of heart from Trump now? I mean, why has he decided to help the Ukrainians at this point?
It is interesting to watch Trump throughout his presidency, even his first presidency. He's very controversial in terms of what he says and what he does. So his statements do not always match with what he's actually saying. And perhaps there is a lot of pressure on him politically to help Ukraine, especially in light of the fact that he didn't deliver what he promised, namely resolving this war within 24 hours. The defense industry, again, those weapons that Ukraine would get are produced in the United States by the likes of RTX, which produces, for instance, Patriot interceptor missiles and NASAMS interceptor missiles and other things such as radars. So there could be a push by the defense industry to say, we want to earn some money. Also, as I said, political pressure to do the right thing as a good Christian, which Trump considers himself to be, to do the right thing, to help Ukraine defend itself, because he didn't say anything about quote-unquote offensive weapons. He was talking specifically about defensive weapons, so I assume it would concern Patriot interceptors. Mm-hmm. That being said, we don't know whether it will be the continuation of what was promised under the Biden administration or whether there will be a new tranche under Trump. So there are still a lot of questions in terms of how much Ukraine will get and when and what is the timeline for that.
And we know that the president has said that the Ukrainians are getting hit very hard. So let me ask you, why are we seeing such intensified Russian attacks now?
Well, for Russia, it's a critical moment now because it sees Ukraine weakened like never before. And we see this on the battlefield and we see this in strikes. And Russia has managed to switch its industry to the war footing and produce quite a lot of drones. Some reports state the Russians can produce up to 1,000 drones a day. So for the Russians, it's important to prepare Ukraine for the winter. In other words, Russia has been trying to destroy critical infrastructure for quite a while now. And since they ramped up the production on the one hand, and most likely, specifically with the Shahid-type drones, they have now a new version, so they have to use up somehow the old stock, which is not as good anymore. So that could be another reason why we're seeing this mix of saturation strikes, which exceed the previous ones. And again, we also have to think about the Ukrainian side, and Ukraine doesn't have the same amount of air defense as it used to have. It doesn't have the same amount of interceptors it used to have. So Ukraine can intercept far less than it could, say, a year ago. So we have to take that into account as well when we look at reports saying that so and so many missiles struck XYZ. That could be also the reason, but essentially it is to basically to break Ukraine's energy infrastructure and also targeting the decentralized system of production as well, which is happening now.
And Marina, I have to ask you, as a military analyst, when you look at U.S. President Trump, at the moment he is taking a victory lap because of what happened in Iran. But he can't do that when it comes to Vladimir Putin in Russia, when it comes to Ukraine. How do you explain President Trump's apparent inability to influence this war, particularly Vladimir Putin?
If we compare Russia to Israel, clearly President Trump doesn't have the same leverage when it comes to Russia. As far as Israel is concerned, Israel depends militarily on U.S. support. Russia does not. And another dimension to this matter is that some reports indicate that Russia was also somehow involved, having back talks with Israeli officials during this standoff between Iran and Israel. So in other words, Trump also has some global issues which he can solve with Putin or can use Putin to his own benefit or to America's benefit, what he perceives to be America's benefit. So it's quite a complicated relationship, and therefore he cannot dictate Putin what to do. Putin will do what he thinks is right from his perspective, and he doesn't need to listen to the United States, especially now, knowing that it's not just about Ukraine, but there are other regions such as Asia, such as the Middle East, where Putin could be potentially useful to the Americans. And so Putin might be using his position in this respect to dictate his own rules, knowing that also the United States cannot support Ukraine indefinitely.
Okay. Marina Miron, as always, Marina, we appreciate your time and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get some reaction from Ukraine. DW's Nick Connolly joins me now from Kyiv. Nick, how has the news of the new US weapons deliveries been received there where you are?
Obviously, this is very welcome. The news that this latest tranche of aid, including those Patriot interceptor missiles that are so crucial, had been stopped last week, really sent shockwaves through this country. People really seeing a very black kind of negative future scenario for this country if they are unable to intercept those missiles, and expecting basically Russia to systematically basically destroy the country's infrastructure and make especially Kyiv, the capital, unlivable. But obviously there is a huge kind of portion of skepticism left, right? We've seen Trump time and time again change his mind basically very short notice without explaining why. There's now been reporting from some American sources that he only intends to send 10 Patriot interceptor missiles, whereas the last shipment alone was going to be 30, we believe. So that's basically enough to stop one night's big Russian attack on Ukraine. That is not enough to really change the situation, to basically allow Ukraine to rebuild its stocks that have been basically very, drawn down in recent weeks. So it is welcome, but it is still little. And I think the big thing will be seeing whether Germany is able to buy more Patriot systems and Patriot missiles, interceptor missiles for Ukraine, as has been discussed.
Now, describe to us, what's life been like for people in Kyiv just in recent weeks?
Well, it's definitely getting harder to be here as a civilian. So apart from those ballistic missiles, which are so expensive and so difficult to intercept, you've also got the Russian-built Shahed drones. Those are basically an Iranian invention that the Russians have refined. And Ukraine had got very good at shooting them down. We were at basically an intercept rate of about 95%. And you'd have these teams on pickup trucks with machine guns shooting them down. But the Russians have reacted. They now fire faster and higher, making it very, very difficult for those teams to get them. And there are just many more of them. Whereas previously you might see 1,000 or so drones launched every month. Now you're seeing several hundred, up to 400 or 500 a night. So it is just on a totally different scale, and many more of them getting through. And they are carrying bigger warheads. So you're seeing lots of people here in Kyiv really wondering, is this a place to stay, or at least for their kids to stay? Should they send their kids to the countryside, at least for the next few months until things become clearer? Or, again, maybe make the decision to leave the country for a second time?
Now, you mentioned the Patriot missile defense system. It is especially important to Ukraine. Let's quickly listen to a Ukrainian aviation defense expert's explanation as to why they are so important.
The Patriot system is the symbol of our missile defense. It is the only system capable of shooting down Russian ballistic missiles. And I want to remind everyone that the production of Russian Iskander missiles is increasing every year. And currently it reaches 60 missiles per month, or even more. The Russians have made it clear that they intend to produce 750 Iskander ballistic missiles in 2025. Not in the future, but this year.
So a massive arms production boost there indeed on the Russian side. But is it realistic that Ukraine could not just defend itself from the attacks that you've described, but also take out Russia's missile production?
Obviously, that is the aim, because trying to intercept every Russian missile coming this way is incredibly difficult and incredibly expensive. You heard those numbers there. 750 of these ballistic missiles are just one category of missile. If you accept that on average it takes 2 or 3 interceptors to shoot down one ballistic missile, and if the Russians are going to have 700 plus of these missiles in just 1 year, that would need, over 1,000 Patriot interceptor missiles, and just now we've had Donald Trump promising 10. So that just gives you a sense of the scale of the problem. In terms of hitting Russia's arms production, that is going to be partly about sanctions, trying to prevent Russia getting the spare parts, the electronics from countries like China to produce more of these modern weapons, North Korea helping with that. And the second thing is going to be about Ukraine trying to hit Russian arsenals, Russian weapons factories far away from the front lines. And obviously part of that would have been Western cruise missiles. Ukraine's still very keen to get the Taurus missile from Germany that can basically get through armored, get through bunkered into production sites like that. But for now, Western countries are very reluctant to do so. So they're having to build their own missiles and are increasingly now testing them out. It's all pretty slow, and it's not on the scale comparable to what Russia has. But it seems, from Ukraine's perspective, that right now that is the only way of trying to get some kind of safety for civilians here, is to basically prevent Russia having the resources to hit this city, this country, night after night.
DW's Nick Connolly there reporting from Kyiv. Thank you, Nick.